Appearances deceive. The person standing before you might carry secrets you could never imagine. Stay with me, because what you're about to witness will reshape everything you believe about courage and retribution. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss a single moment of this incredible journey. The old roadside cafe sat bathed in twilight, its weathered sign flickering against the darkening sky. This wasn't just any establishment, it was a sanctuary on a lonely highway stretch, miles from civilization's comforting embrace. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the aroma of sizzling bacon, bitter coffee, and the distant melody of an oldies tune drifting from the vintage jukebox. The place was frozen in time, with its crimson leather booths, black and white tile flooring, and the soft amber glow from the neon open sign bleeding through the Venetian blinds. This was Stella's Café, where long-haul drivers paused for homemade cobbler and townspeople escaped their kitchen duties. At the heart of this establishment, moving with ethereal grace between customers, was Sophia. She was 18 years old, but possessed a quietness that made her seem simultaneously ancient and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Her server's uniform, a crisp white blouse with the top button loosened against the kitchen's heat, draped over her thin frame. She avoided unnecessary conversation and never forced pleasantries. Orders were recorded with precise efficiency, her words barely audible above the symphony of clattering dishes and patron chatter. To the regular customers, she was simply the reserved young woman who kept to herself, who always remembered the senior couple's usual order in the corner booth, and who never mentioned her personal life. They noticed the darkness beneath her eyes, the way sudden noises made her flinch, and they constructed their own narrative of hardship, a young woman struggling to survive. They weren't wrong, but they couldn't possibly comprehend the complete picture, the chapter that was about to crash through the front entrance. If you're finding this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now. We share powerful stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Your subscription means the world to us. Occupying a secluded booth away from the main dining area sat Trouble Incarnate. Marcus and Tyler, high school seniors, whose entitlement and arrogance were as visible as the green and gold Letterman jackets they wore. Marcus, the more physically imposing one, was composed of coiled tension and a smile devoid of warmth. Tyler, slimmer and more calculating, held his smartphone elevated, its camera lens a cold, mechanical witness. They were creating content. Everything was material for their online audience. "Hey there, beautiful," Marcus announced, his tone dripping with manufactured charm as Sophia approached to refill their water glasses. "You been working on that expression? Because it could use some improvement." Sophia remained silent. She maintained her downward gaze, concentrating on the simple task of pouring water, her hand impressively controlled. "Come on now, don't play shy," Tyler interjected from behind his recording device, his voice carrying a nasal quality. "We're just being sociable. My buddy here finds you attractive in a, well, subdued kind of way." Several nearby diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. An elderly gentleman in a baseball cap grimaced into his mug but remained silent. This was the unfortunate reality sometimes. You witnessed problems unfolding. You averted your gaze. It was simpler that way. "We're going to need more onion rings," Marcus declared, snapping his fingers mere inches from her face. "And this time, make sure they're actually crispy. Think you can handle that simple request?" "I'll place the order," Sophia murmured, attempting to retreat. It was that whisper that triggered everything. Something in its subtle resistance, its refusal to completely surrender, ignited Marcus's volatile temper. This transcended onion rings. This was about establishing dominance. This was about demonstrating for his audience and himself that he commanded this small domain. "I don't believe you heard me properly," Marcus stated, his voice descending to a menacing growl. He rose to his feet, his bulk obstructing her exit. The cafe fell deathly silent. The oldies music seemed to fade into background static. All that remained was the oppressive silence and the red recording indicator on Tyler's smartphone. "I said," Marcus repeated, invading her personal space, his breath warm against her skin. "We want our onion rings immediately." Sophia finally raised her eyes. She met his stare, and within her gaze there existed no terror. There was profound weariness, and beneath that, a glimpse of something harder, something forged in genuine darkness. "The kitchen is overwhelmed. It'll take a few minutes." It was the most extensive statement she'd made to them all evening. It was simple fact, and to Marcus, it represented the ultimate disrespect. "A few minutes," he mocked, glancing back toward Tyler's recording lens with an exaggerated smirk. "Everyone hear that? The timid mouse found her voice. He pivoted back to her, his smirk dissolving, replaced by pure malevolence. I don't think you comprehend the situation. When I request something, I receive it immediately. He shoved her forcefully. It was an aggressive, open-handed push to her shoulder that sent her stumbling backward into an adjacent table, sending a glass sugar dispenser and condiment containers crashing to the floor. A collective gasp swept through the cafe. The cook, a substantial man named Frank, appeared at the service window, his complexion pale. That's enough, he shouted, though he remained fixed behind the safety of his counter. Marcus disregarded him. He was fixated on Sophia, who was slowly rising from the table, her composure finally fracturing. A solitary tear carved a path down her cheek. Observing that tear seemed to energize him further. This was the content Tyler craved. The humiliation, the breaking point. You think you're superior? Marcus snarled, closing the distance again. You think you're too refined to respond? Answer me! He drew back his fist. Time seemed to thicken, becoming viscous. Tyler zoomed his camera closer, his expression gleeful. The trucker in the corner partially rose, his chair scraping loudly against the tiles. Frank yelled again, I'm contacting the police! And then it occurred. The punch wasn't wild or chaotic. It was compact, vicious, and calculated. A solid right hook that connected with Sophia's jaw with a nauseating impact. Her head jerked violently. She collapsed onto the checkered floor, a fragile figure in white fabric. Blood immediately surfaced from her split lip, staining the pristine uniform. Tyler celebrated, maintaining his camera's focus on her. Got it! That's definitely going viral. Marcus stood above her, breathing heavily, a look of savage victory on his features. He flexed his knuckles. Maybe now you'll understand respect. In the ringing aftermath of that impact, a new sound materialized. It wasn't a police siren. It wasn't Frank on his phone. It was the gentle chime of the bell above the cafe's entrance. Every head in the establishment, including Marcus and Tyler's, turned. The man framed in the doorway wasn't remarkably tall, nor did he possess exaggerated musculature. He stood average height with a lean, disciplined build that suggested stamina over raw power. He wore a weathered brown jacket and denim. His hair was cropped short, military precision. His face was sun-worn and creased, marked by time and experiences beyond description. It was a face that was, in this instant, utterly and terrifyingly composed. But his eyes commanded the room's attention. They were the shade of storm clouds, and they surveyed the scene. The laughing teenager with the phone, the proud aggressor standing over the fallen server, the frozen patrons. They absorbed every detail in microseconds. There was no surprise, no visible anger, only cold, methodical assessment, a targeting procedure. Beside him, equally motionless, stood a Belgian Malinois. This wasn't a companion animal. This was a trained instrument on a lead. Its ears stood erect, its perceptive eyes locked on the identical scene, its body taut and prepared. It issued no growl. The silence from the animal was more threatening than any vocalization. The man's name was Daniel Cross, and the young woman on the floor, the one bleeding, was his daughter. He hadn't seen her in 11 months. He'd just returned from a location whose name he'd never utter. A deployment that had tested every limit of his humanity. All he'd wanted was to surprise his daughter at work, to share a meal, and simply observe her, to anchor himself to normalcy through the sight of her face. This was his greeting. For an extended, suspended moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the soft static from the jukebox. Daniel Cross's eyes finally fixed on Marcus. He didn't look at his daughter. He didn't require verification. He'd already processed everything necessary. Tyler, Marcus muttered, his confidence wavering for the first time. Keep recording. Daniel took a single step forward. It wasn't rushed. It was intentional, measured. The step of a man crossing an irreversible threshold. The Malinois, whose name was Sarge, moved in perfect synchronization, a seamless extension of his master's will. Hey man, this isn't your concern, Marcus declared, inflating his chest, attempting to reclaim the authority he possessed moments earlier. It was a pathetic display. He was a child pretending at predation, and an actual predator had just entered. Daniel ignored him. His attention shifted to Tyler and the smartphone. Lower that device, he stated. His voice was low, gravelly, and emotionless. It was the sound of absolute command. This is public property, Tyler squeaked, though the phone in his grip began trembling. We can record whatever we want. Daniel took another step, then another. He was now midway into the cafe. The temperature seemed to drop. The elderly trucker slowly returned to his seat, recognizing that the situation was now under professional management. Then Sophia stirred on the floor. She pushed herself up onto one elbow, her hand moving to her throbbing face. She looked toward the entrance, and her eyes, wide with pain and shock, met her father's. She whispered one word, a word saturated with a lifetime of love, relief, and unspeakable anguish. "Dad!" The word suspended in the air, small and devastating. Marcus's expression went blank with confusion. Tyler's camera faltered. "Dad." Daniel Cross's stormy eyes finally broke from the teenagers and softened for a fraction of a second as they regarded his daughter. That single, vulnerable moment of paternal love was more terrifying than any hostile glare. Then the cold mask returned. He looked back at Marcus. "You struck my daughter." It wasn't inquiry. It was declaration, judgment. Marcus, comprehending the magnitude of his catastrophic miscalculation, took a stumbling step backward, colliding with the booth. "Listen, sir, it was unintentional. She was being rude, and it was a mistake." Daniel didn't appear to register his words. He slowly unzipped his jacket, revealing a plain gray shirt underneath. He handed the leash to the elderly trucker, who accepted it with stunned, mechanical movements. "Hold this, please," Daniel said, his curtsy surreal given the context. He turned back toward the center of the room. He began advancing toward Marcus, his movements liquid, economical. No wasted motion. "You don't understand," Tyler yelled, his voice fracturing with panic, still pointing the phone. "His father is the sheriff. You touch us and you'll be arrested for life." Daniel Cross halted a few feet from Marcus. He observed the teenager, truly observed him, and for the first time, a trace of expression crossed his features. It was pity. The most profound, devastating pity conceivable. "Son," Daniel said, his voice so quiet everyone strained to hear. "I've spent 2 decades in locations your father couldn't locate on a globe. I've confronted individuals who would haunt your dreams permanently. Do you genuinely believe I'm intimidated by a small-town sheriff?" The truth, vast and horrifying, finally penetrated Jake's consciousness. The quiet server, the military bearing, the composure, the control, the sheer terrifying presence. This wasn't merely a father, this was something else entirely. Marcus, driven by a final, desperate surge of survival instinct, committed the most foolish act imaginable. He swung. It was the identical punch he'd used on Sophia, telegraphed, sluggish, fueled by panic. Daniel Cross didn't block it. He didn't even appear to move. He simply shifted his head a fraction, and Marcus's fist whistled harmlessly past his ear. The momentum sent Marcus stumbling forward, off balance. In that moment, Marcus was no longer a high school bully. He was a training exercise, a problem requiring solution. Daniel's hands moved. There was no dramatic preparation, no cinematic martial arts. It was a blur of brutal efficiency. One hand seized Marcus's wrist, rotating it inward and upward in a motion so swift and precise it seemed impossible. There was a loud, sickening pop from Marcus's shoulder. A scream, raw and piercing, erupted from Marcus's throat as he was spun around. Daniel's other arm encircled his neck, not choking but controlling, locking Marcus's head in position, his body bent backward at an agonizing angle. "You enjoy striking defenseless people," Daniel whispered into Marcus's ear, the words for him exclusively. "Let's observe how you appreciate it when circumstances change." He released him with a slight push. Marcus crumpled to the floor, clutching his dislocated shoulder, sobbing in agony and terror. Tyler, witnessing his friend's demolition in seconds, finally dropped his phone. It clattered to the floor, the screen shattering, the recording light extinguishing. He raised his hands. "Please, I didn't touch her. I swear I was only filming. Daniel turned his gaze to Tyler. He didn't advance. He simply looked. That was sufficient. Tyler stumbled backward, tripped over a chair, and collapsed in a heap, curling into a fetal position, whimpering. The entire confrontation had consumed less than 15 seconds. The silence in the cafe was absolute. Daniel Cross stood over the 2 broken teenagers, his breathing still even. He then walked to where his daughter now sat upright, assisted by the elderly woman from the corner booth. He knelt before her, the harsh planes of his face transforming, the soldier vanishing, leaving only the father. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with indescribable emotion. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her wounded face, his thumb tracing the already bruising skin around her eye. "I knew you'd come today," Sophia whispered, a fresh tear mixing with the blood on her lip. "I had a feeling." "I'm so sorry," he said, and in those 3 words, he apologized for every missed birthday, every holiday absence, every nightmare she'd faced alone. "Don't be," she said, managing a small, wavering smile. "You're here now." In the distance, the faint wail of police sirens began growing louder. Frank had made the call. The real world, with its laws and complications, was finally arriving. What followed was turbulent. The sheriff, a stern, competent man named Patterson, arrived with his deputies. He surveyed the scene, the sobbing bullies, the quiet server, and the man kneeling beside her, and his expression hardened. He knew Marcus and Tyler. He'd received complaints. He also knew Daniel Cross by reputation, if not personally. He listened to accounts from every patron. The trucker, the elderly couple, Frank. They all recounted the identical story, a story of unprovoked aggression, brutal assault, and a father's intervention. The cracked phone with its damning video was secured as evidence. When the sheriff approached Daniel, he did so with measured respect. "Daniel," he said, nodding, "we need to sort through this." Daniel stood, turning to face the law.
"I understand, Tom."
He knew the sheriff, too. It was a small town. The aftermath was a complex weave of justice and mercy. Marcus was charged with assault, Tyler with complicity and cyber harassment. Their lives of privilege and popularity evaporated instantly, their futures irrevocably altered. The video, though never officially released, was described in detail during legal proceedings. The story spread through the town like wildfire. The bullies who assaulted the quiet server and discovered her father was a special forces operator. But Daniel Cross, despite the sheriff's understanding, also faced scrutiny. His use of force, while arguably justified in defending his daughter, was extreme. There were questions, paperwork, internal investigation. Ultimately, the charges against him were dismissed. The military quietly and efficiently protected one of their own. He had acted to halt a violent assault. It was a line he hadn't crossed, but one he'd approached. The true resolution, however, wasn't found in a courtroom. It was found weeks later at Stella's Café, which had become busier than ever with patrons offering silent support. Sophia was back at work. The bruise on her face had faded to a pale yellow shadow, but something within her had transformed. The quietness remained, but the fear was gone. She stood straighter. She maintained eye contact. She was no longer just a quiet server. She was the young woman whose father, her silent, steadfast protector, had moved heaven and earth to return home to her. Daniel Cross sat at the counter, nursing black coffee. Sarge lay at his feet. He wasn't a man of many words. The storm had passed. Justice had been swift and brutal, but it had come at a cost. He'd seen the look in his daughter's eyes when he dismantled those teenagers. Not fear of him, but fear for him. He had brought the darkness of his world into hers, and he would have to live with that. But as Sophia approached, refilled his coffee, and placed a hand on his shoulder, he knew it was a price he would pay 1,000 times over. He had shown her that, regardless of how distant he was, regardless of how deep the darkness, he would always, always come for her. And in a world filled with Marcus and Tylers, that was the only truth that genuinely mattered. The quiet had returned to the cafe, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of peace, the quiet of a battle fought and won, the quiet of a father and daughter finally safely home. Stories like this resonate across the nation and touch hearts in every community. It makes me curious. From which corner of the country are you watching this unfold?